Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Warzone 2.0 has been out for a bit now. I've been grinding, putting in a ton of hours, testing as many different guns as possible with as many different setups as possible to figure out what is the true Warzone 2 meta. And today we are breaking just that down. We've got a brand new tier list here. Obviously it looks very similar to our multiplayer one if you've caught those videos, with a few different categories here. And obviously between multiplayer and Warzone, things are pretty different with how engagements work, how the health works. So this list will have some similarities, but also be specific to just Warzone 2 gameplay. And as we continue to see weapon tuning updates, new weapons added in, all sorts of that stuff, we'll be able to update this and bring you guys the new meta updates as fast as possible. So our categories here, of course, absolute meta first and foremost. This is the best weapons that are going to dominate. We've got top tier, which means they are very good, just not the absolute best. Competitive, you can get away with using them, you can have different setups for them and they'll hold their own. Average, they're all right, you're gonna get some kills with them, but there's several better choices. Below average, you probably want to avoid using. Niche, which is just used for very specific things. And then garbage, absolutely terrible, no point in using. So first up, the SO14 in our battle rifles. Now the SO14 does have one of the lower TTKs in multiplayer. It can get away with being decent there, and I think I have it in competitive there for MP. In Warzone though, with that extra health, it's just average to me. It can be like a 3 to 4 shot kill if you land 1 or 2 headshots, but overall it's nothing too crazy. Average is probably where it's going to cap out unless it gets a pretty significant buff. The TAC V absolutely is competitive. I would love to put this in top tier, but to me, the recoil it has is just a little too much. The thing is a powerhouse, don't get me wrong. This thing absolutely melts. I was using it last night actually when I'm recording this video, and it felt so good medium range. But outside of like 40 meters, it was too much to use, even with like a longer zoom scope, even built for max control, because the recoil is rough. So it's got the damage, but the recoil is holding it back some. The FTAC Recon, also going to go in average. You can spam this one a little bit more than the SO14, but its damage is also nothing too crazy there. Then the Lockman 762, while in multiplayer, I think it's really solid because it's like a 2-shot kill. Here in Warzone, with its fire rate, its just damage properties, I'm not a huge fan of this either. I think that also ends up landing in average as well. So out of the battle rifles, the TAC V is definitely standing out. Now we get into the SMGs, which I think is a very competitive category. First up, the Vel 46, the MP7. Its damage is not really impressive in any mode, MP or Warzone. And obviously when you go to Warzone and there's engagements at further distances for SMGs even, there's obviously more health with all the armor plates and everything. It doesn't really succeed much outside of the first 10 meters or so. So to me, that's a pretty average SMG. The MX9 is surprisingly good. The AUG SMG I am going to throw into competitive. It's been used by a lot of pros already. They're really enjoying the MX9. I've used it myself and it feels good. It's nice and agile, nice and mobile. It probably would be higher up on the list if it had a bigger magazine. 32 rounds, I believe, is the cap for it, and that's just not enough for anything outside of solos. Now the Lockman sub, the MP5, I think is a top tier choice. The thing is great. It's got good mobility, really good control. Like you can beam in mid-range even with this thing. Good damage per mag, good or just overall TTK. It's checking all the right boxes. The MP5, absolutely a top tier choice. The Voznev, I would say, is more of a competitive SMG. Its damage is not the craziest. It is really good to use though in terms of mobility. It also is very simple in terms of recoil as well. So it's holding its own, but there are some better choices. Also, just a reminder, as we're going through all this, around 57% of viewers watching are not already subscribed. So if that's you and you enjoy the content, you want to guarantee you're always up to date with news, updates, class setups, tips, everything going on in COD between Warzone 2, DMZ, and MW2. This is the place to be, so feel free to hit that subscribe button, join us on the road to 900K. Also, if you guys enjoy this video or if you find it helpful, let me know by dropping a like on it as well. And want to give a quick shout out to Gamer Advantage. You guys always see me wearing these frames. They are the most essential part of my day-to-day setup. They allow me to produce more content more efficiently. They allow me to game longer and get more gameplay and footage for you guys. By far the best optimizing piece of my setup is these glasses, and once the day is done, I can go to bed at night, sleep nice and easy, because these things wake up feeling refreshed to do it all again the next day. They are game changers and lifesavers if you're looking at screens for long periods of time. They offer prescription or regular lenses, plenty of different frame options. If you want to pick up a pair for yourself in time for the holidays, code WHosImmortal has you covered with that nice little discount. Link will be down below. The Hurricane I also think is competitive. Its damage is just on the lower end, I think, of being top tier. It's really close. If it gets another buff like it got recently with season 1, it could certainly make its way up. The great thing here though is that super large magazine by default. It also is very good for mid-range with that easy recoil as well, so it's got quite a few things going for it. The Bass P, again, I would say is just a competitive SMG once you build it out. The ground loot, not all that great because it's got that smaller magazine, but when you build it correctly, certainly is competitive. The Mini Bach is one that I am torn on because it's got the damage per mag, but I think ultimately it also is just a competitive SMG. I wasn't lying when I said this was a very competitive weapon category, but a lot of these, their TTKs are good, but they're not as good as they could be to truly be a top tier gun. And really truly, we want most things in average or competitive to have a super diverse meta as is. The PDSW I'm also going to throw into competitive just because our next gun, the Fennec, is absolute meta, and I think I would take the Lockman and the Fennec over the PDW currently. The P90, as it's also known, is really solid, and just like the Hurricane, it has that larger magazine by default, which is super nice, so it's right there, borderline top tier. That's probably the closest out of all of these, I would say. Then we get into the shotguns, and frankly, I don't think many here are going to be all that crazy. I think the Lockwood, because it only has 2 shots, even with slugs in it, is just an average shotgun. The Expedite's damage is a little bit lower, so I'm not a huge fan of that. The Brysons could be interesting here because I know the Bryson 800 is very strong. From what I've used of it already, there are some very interesting one-shot kills. So I think I'm going to drop that one into competitive. I don't like the Bryson 890 as much, so I'm going to say that one's average. I think of the shotguns, the Bryson 800 is the most useful, I guess you could say. Then we get into the LMGs, and this again is another very competitive category. So the Sakin MG38, easily competitive. I mean, this thing is low recoil, has a really good TTK over range. It's obviously very heavy though because it is an LMG, and the same deal with the AUG LMG, the HCR 56. I really wanted to have this one in top tier because I believe its damage is there, but if you want it to be used for mid-range and long range, it is just so slow if you want to keep the control feeling good in it, feeling like a laser beam. So I've tried a lot of different tunes with this and trying to, you know, build it to be versatile, and I've struggled to really find one setup that works well for everything. The Icarus, I don't think is all that crazy. It is really good for close range, but it's an LMG, so you're not going to be using that realistically in close range fights. Its fire rate and recoil over range are just not practical. Its damage per mag is not nearly as good as the other LMGs. Not a huge fan of the Icarus. Now the RAL, I would say this one is top tier only because the RPK is absolute meta. Now, these two are by far the best LMGs. Not even close. They are so dominant. They both pack a punch. The RAL, though, is just a little too slow for my liking. Like, it is a top weapon for sure. That's why it's in top tier. But then there's the RPK, which to me is just so much more reliable, and I gotta have them in different categories for that reason. They are both, though, fantastic choices. And then finally we got the RAP, which I would say is also probably average with the Icarus. I mean, the RAP and the Icarus are pretty close to being below average, maybe the RAP more so than the Icarus, but either of those are not really ones that I would love to use in game. They're all right, and if you get in the right gunfight, they're gonna be just fine, but for general versatility and overall competitiveness, they're just not it. Then we get to the Marksman rifles, the EBR. Top tier in my opinion. This thing's got crazy good damage. I can like 3 to 4 shot kill in the mid range. I love this thing. We talked about it already in one of the top loadout videos. Easily a top tier choice. The only thing holding it back is the fact that it uses sniper ammo. The SPR is competitive. I'm glad that it's not as dominant as it was in multiplayer, obviously. The increased health here definitely has brought that thing into balance. The MK2, I would say, is just average. This thing's not really doing anything crazy here in Warzone with that increased health. It's fun to use with the way that it behaves in game, but it's not anything that's seriously in the meta conversation. The LMS, I would also probably say, is competitive. The thing can be spammed a little bit more. It's very FAL-like, if you will, from Warzone 1, so I'd say competitive is an appropriate place for it to land. Good headshot multiplier as well. SAB 50 is something that is close to the SPR, but I don't think it's on the same level as the SPR, so I'm going to drop that down into average. I wouldn't have those in the same category if I was going to use the SPR every single time over the SAB 50. And then the TAC M, also average. I mean, the thing has a slow fire rate, really good damage, but it's not super practical to use. Then getting into the snipers, again, this is a super competitive category because honestly, they're all pretty consistent, I would say. MCPR, I would go competitive at the very least. That's borderline top tier though. Signal, I do think is a competitive choice just because it's got that slightly lower damage. It can be spammed a little bit more, but to me, I like the bolt action snipers a little bit more for their feel. Victus, in my opinion, is top tier. This, out of all the snipers, the one that I think feels the most natural, the most smooth, and the most easy to use as well in terms of predicting the bullet lead and the bullet drops. So to me, the Victus is the go-to sniper right now. The LAB50 and the SPX basically feel like the same sniper to me, and I think they're both competitive at the very least. Now we get into some of the more niche areas. The knife obviously is not a serious competitive weapon whatsoever. You're using it to have fun. It's a niche weapon for sure. Same deal with the riot shield. No surprises there. Then we move on into the pistols and things get interesting here. The P890 is consistent for close range. I've been using it akimbo and it's got some decent damage. I would say this one is probably going to fall into competitive in terms of a pistol. Obviously, we have all these guns in competitive. You're not comparing the P890 to the TAC-V or to the MCPR 300, but for what the pistol is supposed to do, it's competitive for sure. The Deagle is probably going to be our first weapon in below average. It's not terrible, but you gotta have good accuracy to use it, and it's just not nearly as realistic as any of the other pistol options here. X12 we're going to throw into average. It's your starting pistol. It's nothing crazy, but it can get the job done. Basilisk is probably going to be average just because of snake shots. They're not nearly as lethal as they are in multiplayer because they increased health, but I'd take the Basilisk over the Deagle any day of the week. And then the X13 auto, I'm going to say it's competitive, either as a kimbo or as single. Having that fully auto pistol is nice, and having like sort of that pocket SMG is nice to have as that backup. Now the launchers obviously are all going to fall into niche here. You're not using any of these realistically in any sort of meta way whatsoever, so no surprises there. That's pretty much how it's always been throughout Warzone 1 as well. And then lastly, we've got our rifles. And things are going to be interesting here because they land in a lot of different categories. So first up, Lockman 5.56. I'm going to say this one is competitive simply because it is low recoil. This thing is very easy to use. Its damage though is a bit lacking, and that's why it won't be top tier or absolute meta probably anytime soon. The M13. Here's where I'm torn. In multiplayer, I think it's a very good gun because it is so low recoil, it's so easy to use that you're gonna have a really good realistic TTK, and it's the same deal here in Warzone, but there's also other low recoil rifles like the Lockman that make me want to almost put this one in average. I'm not gonna lie. It's borderline competitive and average for sure. I think because its damage is a little bit lower, it's going to stay in average. Currently, as much as I love the feel of the M13, it's easily the easiest weapon to use. The Lockman is something I'd choose more. Now, the AUG built for mid-range, I think is top tier as well. This is the AUG rifle, obviously. Super low recoil, really consistent in those mid-range gunfights. Not really great for long range or for super close range, but for sniper support and for those mid-range engagements, it's a beast. The M16. It's bad in multiplayer. Maybe I'm a bit too harsh on it in multiplayer. However, in Warzone, it absolutely is a garbage tier choice. Its damage is just nowhere near being competitive at all in the rifle conversation or the general meta conversation. It's just not something you should be using right now. Now the Kastov 74U, I'm going top tier as well. The only thing holding it back from being absolute meta is its mid-range to long-range versatility. This is basically an SMG disguised as a rifle. It is meant for close range and close range only, and I think if it was maybe a little bit faster, it'd be absolute meta, so it could compete a little bit more with the mobility and versatility of SMGs there, but it brings the power for close range and it's easily top tier. Kastov 545 definitely falling in average. This one honestly might even be below average, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, its damage is not really anything impressive. It's got low recoil, and that's about the only thing it's got going for it. M4, I would say, is a competitive choice. It seems a little weak compared to some of the other rifles. Like, for instance, in the mid-range, I felt like the STB was a little bit more consistent because of its recoil and its realistic TTK. So it's definitely borderline top tier if it had slightly better damage. The TAC-56, to me, is absolute meta. The thing is the best rifle in my opinion. It has low recoil, a really consistent TTK over mid and long range. I've really enjoyed my time with that. Then lastly, we got the Kastov 7.62, which I think is a top tier choice. The AK, it's a little bit heavier for a rifle. Basically, this and the RPK are very similar, and the only reason that the Kastov isn't in absolute meta is because the RPK is absolute meta, and currently I'm taking the RPK over that. But this is a very healthy meta and very diverse meta already. Basically, anything in competitive top tier and absolute meta you can use right now, and you're guaranteed to have a fight with. You are going to be able to compete with those. Several of these average options can hold their own just fine depending on the gunfight. You love to see this. Obviously, this is going to evolve over time. We're going to see changes to maybe the TTK with the health, and we're going to definitely see plenty of changes to these weapons. But as it stands right now, this is the overall Warzone 2 meta, and that's gonna wrap things up for this one. If you guys enjoyed the video, let me know by dropping a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, as I mentioned earlier, we are on the road to 900,000 subs, and if you want to guarantee you're always up to date with all things going on in COD, this is the place to be for MW2, Warzone 2, and DMZ. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.